All right, everyone. This is episode number 2 of Fight Night Picks for the Fans. Myself, Craig Allen, my co-host Evil Eddie should be joining us here soon. And if you've got any questions at all that you want to ask, just to start right off, go ahead. I mean, the whole point of this platform is so everyone can, have their voice heard. And if you have any MMA questions that you'd like to ask, feel free to ask them. During the week. I'm pretty active. I would like to think on Twitter, and I've got the podcast and whatnot, and it doesn't really give you guys, a great chance to ask any questions when it's just me and my guests. So this is, this is your opportunity now. If you have anything, let me know. So before we really get started, just a reminder that this call is brought to you by Dialogue, and if you like discussion and debate, Dialogue lets you have your own call-in show over the internet. So like I said, second installment, it's a chance for us to connect and have a conversation about MMA. And I've got a few topics that I'd like to cover as soon as Eddie's able to join us. But, it's more of a conversational style and call-in style than anything. So, like I said, I'll open it up to calls. If you have anything, just click that talk on live on air button there, the yellow button, and let me know your questions. Or fill out a comment at the bottom. We can talk about it. So, just waiting on Eddie, and some of the topics I have, will Diaz and Poirier materialize in time for UFC 230? I mean, I realize it's been talked about. They had a press conference and whatnot, but both of them seem to be dragging their heels, which is kind of surprising because Dustin Poirier, he's been super active here lately, and he's gone on quite a run with 2 Alvarez fights, among others. So, as well, the Gaethje fight. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, I understand where Nate Diaz would kind of want to take his time, make sure that all the kinks are kind of worked out, and that the money's there for sure. But on Poirier's end, I would expect that contract to be signed, ASAP. You definitely have to get that one going. I got a question in here. Can I just call in? Doesn't detect a microphone. So if you're looking to call in and you're on iOS, you might have an issue if you're listening in. And definitely make sure that you're on Wi-Fi and that the microphone's detected. Sometimes there's some issues with that. So Ryan, if you're listening in, hopefully that answered your call or answered your question. So like I said, Poirier Diaz, hopefully we're able to see that one materialize in time for UFC 230. And I know that card's so stacked. That's one of the ones that I'm really looking forward to this year, especially with all the middleweight matchups. I mean, you've got Weidman and Rockhold in the works. You've got so many different fights on that card that make a lot of sense. As well, we've got UFC 229 coming up, and I see Ryan still having some issues, and we can have issues on this. I mean, it's a new platform, guys, but it gives us a good opportunity, to get call-ins in. So if you have any questions or whatnot, let me know for sure, and I'll just keep going. So UFC 229, Conor and Khabib. I mean, I'd like to know what you guys are thinking about it, who you have winning as of right now. And Ryan, if you're listening in and you've got a question, maybe even just toss it down in the comments, and I'll be glad to answer it. Sorry that it's not working for you right now on Wi-Fi. But yeah, like I said, UFC 229 we have coming up. That's such an interesting fight. I mean, I talked about it on the podcast. I've talked about it on a few different call-in shows, but is it enough time to build up to a Conor and Khabib fight? I mean, this is probably one of the biggest fights we've seen, in recent memory. I mean, we've got the Lesnar and DC fight that might happen the end of this year or early next year. But I think Conor Khabib, it outclasses that. It's 2 of the sport's best and brightest stars. And I mean, Khabib 26-0, like they say, never lost a round before. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, he's got such a great background with the Sambo and paired up against Conor striking. It makes for an excellent matchup. And I really think UFC 229 in Vegas is going to be one of those pay-per-views that lives up to the hype. This and UFC 230. And then, going even more forward, UFC, or I guess closer to us, UFC 228, Till Woodley. I mean, I'd like to get your thoughts on that fight. If there's anybody listening, how do you see that fight going? I won't offer my prediction until we get a caller that calls in, but that's a barn burner, that fight. I mean, it could either become a counter-striking matchup between Till and Woodley. We saw it in both Thompson fights, or I guess all 3 Thompson fights, the 2 Woodley-Thompson fights, and then the Till-Thompson fight this year at UFC Fight Night in Liverpool. But it'll be interesting to see what happens between those two. I mean, they're both power punchers. Woodley I went through it on the Toctagon here earlier today, and Ty O'Keefe and I talked about that matchup and how it'll be interesting where most people forget about Tyron Woodley and his punching ability and his punching power. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. So Ryan's actually sent me some questions here. I know he's listening in. So I'm going to read his questions on air, and then I'll answer them. And if anybody wants to call in, if you want to chime in, please do so. I'd love to have you on. So Ryan says, heard rumors that John Jones might be fighting UFC 230, and I do have Conor beating Khabib via second round TKO. And Ryan, I could definitely see that happening. I mean, if Conor's going to win, it has to be by knockout for sure, because we've seen that his cardio has been suspect. One thing I will give him is, I know the rounds are shorter in boxing, 3-minute round rather than 5, but it'll be really interesting to see how his cardio's evolved, if it's gotten any better over the past year, because we've seen him training, but we haven't seen him in a cage. We haven't seen hard sparring or anything. So from right now, I'm picking Khabib to win that fight. And then as far as John Jones at UFC 230, man, wouldn't that make like the main event? I know it hasn't been announced yet, that there's the main event hasn't been announced. So it'd be great if we could see John Jones hop back in the cage. My pick right now for the main event for that card would be Alexander Gustafson and Daniel Cormier for the light heavyweight title. But it'll be really interesting to see. And Ryan, I really like your logic there. And he also goes on to say, I think Poirier has evolved, and Diaz being out 2 years might be bad for him with that much inactivity. I agree with you there. I had a bit of a back and forth on Twitter with Dean Thomas one day, and I had a lot of haters coming out against me. But the point of Dean Thomas's tweet was, so can you think of another fighter in the UFC that has the finishing instincts that Dustin Poirier has? And in my mind, I mean, there's a lot of fighters out there with that finishing instinct that go out there for the kill. I mean, George St. Pierre, a point fighter, he's not one of them, but you think of a Michael Bisping when he fought Luke Rockhold, and great cardio ability on Michael Bisping's part. But, he always had that finishing instinct. He always wanted to finish a fight. You look at the fight with Kung Lee, where he absolutely destroyed him. So, as far as Dustin Poirier is concerned, he has so many tools in his tool belt that he can finish fights. And I think, Nate Diaz, he's always a draw. He's a fan favorite for sure. And I really like his style. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens in that fight. So if there's anyone listening, I see there's 15 currently listening. Be sure to call in if you can. If you're having any issues, let me know. And if you can't call in like Ryan's done here, send me a tweet or, write in the comments below if you have any questions. So Ryan's last thing that he said, he says, I see Till destroying Woodley due to his size and nullifying the takedown. He has better takedown defense than what he's being given credit for, which I will agree with that, Ryan. But at the same time, Tyron Woodley's just such a special fighter. I know if you look at his record, if you look at his SureDog stats, I mean, he has so many different ways to finish a fight. And then you'll say, well, the submission attempts. Well, he's got 5 submission wins, and those were his first 5 wins. You're right. And that was a long time ago against some decent fighters. But, we look through his record. Win over Damian Maia, win over Wonderboy, and the draw with Wonderboy. I mean, the win over Damian Maia nullified every single takedown attempt. I think it was, 0 for 23 or 0 for 24 on Maia's end. And he played a smart fight. I know once you get that contract and you become a champion, there's going to be more money involved, obviously, for Woodley. So it was smart on his part to fight the way that he did. In his fight against Thompson, I think, both guys were going to try and counter-strike, but Woodley's definitely got that power. And that I know he's short. I know in the poster that just came out that the UFC released, he's a shorter fighter. I get that. But he has so much power in his fist. You look at the fight against Robbie Lawler where he knocked him out. You look at the stun gun win, the Carlos Condit win, the Josh Koscheck win. Now, I realize in saying that was 5 years ago against Josh Koscheck, but still, the last thing to go in a fighter is usually always the power. So it'll be interesting to see, what happens for Tyron Woodley. So a couple of comments here. I see Till is doing the last of his camp at the UFC Performance Institute. I guess that means he's going to show up missing weight with shitty wrestling. Yeah, Brown Bear, it's going to be interesting. Everybody's kind of overlooking Darren Till in one regard, and I believe that's, he missed weight, or he missed weight in the Thompson fight, but he almost died in that weight cut. I mean, he had blindness issues in that. Like, that's scary stuff. But on the other side of it, Tyron Woodley too, he could miss weight. I mean, he hasn't he hasn't been in a cage since when? When was that last Maya fight? July 2017. So it'll be interesting to see both those guys. And as well, I mean, I know I'm picking Woodley right now, and I'm going to do a lot more analysis, and you're going to get my take leading up to UFC 228. But I mean, being out for that long, major shoulder surgery, that could affect his power. That could affect his punching and his quickness. So we'll see what happens there. It's interesting that you see Gustafson Cormier at 205. I personally don't. I understand that. Yeah, it's tough to see DC going back down to 205, but he has talked about defending the belt, and he was thinking about defending against Shogun. So, I mean, we think about that. At the same time, you had Demetrius Johnson before last weekend against Cejudo, where he said that he wanted to fight Jose Torres, or I can't remember. There was another fighter. Oh, Sergio Pettis that he wanted to fight. So it'll be interesting. I mean, it could just be all talk by Cormier that he wants to defend the belt, but we'll see what happens. And I appreciate all the comments. Like I said, guys, don't be afraid. Make sure you call in. That's the whole point of dialogue. They want to open it up to call-ins, and if you yourself want to host a call-in show, it's right up at the top. Host a dialogue. Just sign in with your Twitter, and you can become a content creator on here. So I'm gonna keep going down through the comments. I see Till, like I said, I personally see Till beating Woodley as well, as long as he doesn't get hit with the overhand. Yeah, I mean, that's Woodley's strongest asset there is that overhand. Think Woodley will keep the belt. Yeah, I mean, right now I do as well, but we'll see what happens leading up to UFC 228. Hopefully, fingers crossed, these two guys can make weight. DC versus Lesnar is a tougher fight for DC than what he thinks. Brock on top of anybody is a problem, and he has great pressure. Program of punch is a very interesting fight. I agree with you there. I'm in the minority of the MMA media, and I think it's going to be a tough fight for Daniel Cormier. I mean, a lot of people want to overlook the fight that Brock had against Mark Hunt, and they'll say, "Oh, well, Mark Hunt was older," and blah blah blah. But man, Mark Hunt's a tough out for anyone. So I think that's going to be a tough fight for Daniel Cormier. I mean, of course, right now Daniel Cormier out of the gate. That's my pick, and it should be a great fight for sure. But it will be a tougher fight than a lot of people are alluding to. Do you see bouts added UFC 229? Kevin Lee versus TBA. Who do you think he could fight? Eddie Alvarez. I think Kevin Lee, Tony Ferguson's the fight to make for 229, especially where Tony Ferguson was cleared to fight today. I think that's the most interesting fight for me right now. If you want to call it a Mount Rushmore of lightweights, I mean, I understand the rankings and whatnot, but I think the toughest fight for your champ in Khabib Nurmagomedov would be Tony Ferguson, Dustin Poirier, or Conor McGregor. I think those are the three toughest people to fight. So I really want to see Kevin Lee fight Tony Ferguson again. I know the weight cut was an issue for Kevin Lee in the last fight, and I know he had the staph infection on his chest, but he gave it to Tony Ferguson. So I really think that'd be a good fight for UFC 229. Read tweets today hinting Jones versus Gustafson as 230 main. That makes sense too. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, would you guys out there listening, would you think that would be for an interim belt, or would that be for the true light heavyweight belt? Would they strip DC? Let's see. Gus will put a beating on Jones again if it does happen. Let's hope the judges don't screw him over this time. I think Alexander Gustafsson, it's a shame we haven't been able to see him in the cage as often as I'm sure he would like. The injuries definitely sucks for a fighter. I really enjoyed his fight against Glover Teixeira. That 3 or 4 punch combo that he threw at the end of that fight was insane. And he's definitely one of the best fighters in the UFC, let alone the 205 division. So I'd really like to see Gustafsson get his due, fight for the title. And whether it's against John Jones or whether it's against Daniel Cormier, we'll see what happens. So if you guys have any thoughts about that, let me know. Make sure you call in. I appreciate all the comments, like I said. Top comment on there now. Aldo wants to move up 155 for a big fight. What about Tony Ferguson versus Aldo? That one's fun. I mean, matching up the striking of Aldo versus Tony Ferguson. He's got such a weird thing about him. He's great at jiu-jitsu. He's good in the clinch, so good in the clinch. He can take you down. His punching, it's so unorthodox, and he's such a special fighter. I mean, I was pretty down on Tony Ferguson at one point. I mean, you watch the interviews and it's a little cringy with the sunglasses and all that, but once you get past it, he's such a special fighter to watch. And if you haven't watched a lot of Tony Ferguson fights, I definitely encourage you to go out there and watch him. So I'm just gonna let's see here. I mean, his last fight against Kevin Lee, that was something special. The RDA decision, submission against Lando Venata, and he was hurt in that fight. Like a lot of people look at Lando Venata's record, and it's not in the UFC, and I mean it's nothing special. He's what the loss against Ferguson, win over McDessie, who I had on the podcast yesterday. If you didn't get a chance to watch that, head on over to YouTube, and I was able to get Josh Emmett and John McDessie on the podcast, Canadian there. But that was a pretty crazy spinning wheel kick knockout over him. Decision loss to David Tamor, a draw, split against Bobby Green, and then the loss to Jakar Close. But yeah, I mean, Lando Venata is a special talent. So that win for Ferguson where he got hurt, that was awesome. But yeah, let's see. Not sure if Aldo could deal with Ferguson's style, skill set, reach. I'd like Jose to win though if this happens. Man, what did you think of that body shot knockout for Jose Aldo against Jeremy Stephens? It was so great to see Aldo get the win in that. But who would have predicted that? I mean, I definitely did. And I thought Jeremy Stephens was just going to continue his roll up to the top of the division with the win over, again, podcast guest there yesterday, Josh Emmett. But, man, great for Jose Aldo. But Ferguson's skill set, he's such a hard fighter to go up against. There's so many different things. So Aldo's definitely back. It's sad he never got the rematch against McGregor, which I thought he would have deserved. I agree with you there. And, maybe we see those two fight at 155. Another guy at 155 that I'm really high on right now, 150. A fighter that I'm really high on is Anthony Pettis in the lightweight division. I think he's a fighter who's definitely back at the same time. He's looked really good lately. It was a real shame in that Poirier fight where he suffered the rib injury and had to kind of submit, I guess, if you want to call it that. But, yeah, great fight for Pettis. It's great to see a return for him and Jose Aldo, two former champs. I really like the idea of GSP fighting the winner of Khabib versus Conor. I think he deserves it. But what if the winner takes fight at a catch weight of 170? Well, I think that's a fight to make. I mean, it wouldn't be a catch weight at 170. It would just be a welterweight fight. But that's an interesting one there. I want to see George St. Pierre fight the winner of Conor and Khabib. I want to see it at 170 just because GSP's had those health issues lately, whether it's colitis, and he put all that weight on to fight at 185. And yeah, he didn't look great. I mean, he looked good, but leading up into the fight, he didn't look like himself. So I'd really like to see that fight. And right at welterweight, my bad. Don't worry about it. I was just I was just trying to figure things out in my head as I was talking. I didn't mean to sound like that. So like I said, if you guys have any questions, keep them coming in the comments section as well. Please call in. I mean, I really enjoy, it's a lot of fun on this platform when there's call-in. So be sure to call in. Did Dana say that the winner of Conor versus Khabib and Daniel versus Nate would fight? Not sure about that. If you could clarify more, I guess. Yeah. I don't know who the winner of Conor Khabib fights. I would like to see the winner of Poirier Nate fight them because I think that Poirier would win. But at the same time, if you have Kevin Lee versus Tony Ferguson, is Tony Ferguson still the real interim champion? There's a lot of question marks. I mean, there's a lot of different things in the UFC right now that you got to kind of scratch your Dustin. Oh, okay. Dustin versus Nate. Yeah, I think the winner of Dustin versus Nate. That makes a lot of sense. Sorry, I kept thinking of Daniel Cormier. My bad there. But that fight obviously wouldn't make any sense. So, yeah, I think that makes the most. Dustin versus Nate, the winner fights Conor versus Khabib. And there were a lot of different people on Twitter that sent out, different little graphs and diagrams. If Conor loses, he fights Nate. If Nate loses, he can fight. So there's a lot of different fights to make. Lightweight's definitely the most stacked division in the UFC. And elsewhere, I mean, if you look at different organizations, they all have good lightweight divisions. You look at even Bellator. I mean, hopefully we're able to see Michael Chandler transition over from Bellator into the UFC. I would love that. I think he'd give a lot of different guys a run for their money. And whether or not we see Eddie Alvarez back in the UFC or he runs it back in Bellator and has a fight with Chandler, that would be really good. As long as Nate isn't rusty, I think he could run through Poirier unless Dustin decides to grapple. Yeah, I mean, let's see here. So I'm going to pull up Poirier. And let's look at Nate Diaz, too. If anybody out there that's listening, if you haven't seen the Nate Diaz fight against Marcus Davis at the Garden in Boston, that's one of my favorite fights to watch. I mean, I'm a really big Marcus Davis fan from Maine, actually from Holton, Maine, not far away from New Brunswick. So if you haven't seen that fight, when was that? That was a long time ago. Oh, let's see. Nate Diaz win over Marcus Davis. Yeah, that was 2010, where he won by guillotine in the third round. But his striking was on point in that game, fight rather. So, yeah, Nate Diaz. If we look at it, so he's got 4 knockouts, TKOs, 12 submissions, 3 decision wins, 11 losses, 1 by knockout, 1 submission, 1 decision. So lost the one to Connor by decision. Lost to Josh Thompson, who that's a really special fighter, and it's a shame that he's had injury woes, but he's really transitioned into broadcasting and different things well. So good for Josh Thompson there. And decision loss to Bendo, decision to Rory McDonald, decision to Stun Gun, decision to Gray Maynard. Yeah, lots of decisions, but obviously, I mean, we all know Nate Diaz, one of the most fun fights to watch. Hope so. Still trying to decipher Diaz tweets, LOL, has he signed to fight at 230? As far as I know, no, he hasn't signed on to fight at 230. They're still both kind of dragging their heels between Poirier and Diaz. So hopefully we can see those two sign up. But like I was alluding to, so Dustin Poirier, 24-5 and 1 no contest, 12 knockouts, 7 submissions, 5 decisions. Been knocked out twice, been submitted once, and lost 1 decision. And if we run through, I mean, if anybody ever wants to have an argument about Michael Johnson with me, I'm a big Michael Johnson fan. So he got knocked out by Michael Johnson, straight knockout, TKO against Conor McGregor, lost to Cub Swanson, lost to Korean Zombie, Danny Castillo a long time ago in WEC. Those are his losses. So if we really look into it, since 2012, Korean Zombie, Cub Swanson, Conor, Michael Johnson, those are some pretty tough fights to take. So he's hyping it and doing a damn good job. I think the fight goes ahead. I think so too. And, between Nate and Dana White, they're 2 of the best hype men going out there. So I'm sure they'll continue going back and forth, and Nate Diaz will be able to sleep on a great big pile of money. But yeah, as far as Dustin Poirier is concerned, I mean, we look at his recent wins. Eddie Alvarez, TKO. Justin Gaethje, TKO. Submission on Anthony Pettis. Not a real submission, because Anthony Pettis, I mean, he was forced to tap or to end the fight due to injury. Jim Miller, decision. Bobby Green, knockout over Medeiros. Carlos Diego Ferreira. Like, he's fought a lot of good fighters, and he's got so many different ways of finishing the fight. So, like I said, if there's anybody out there, we've got 18 currently listening. Make sure you call in. If you're not able to, let me know in the comments, because if there's any issues, I can pass it along to Dialogue. And if you're interested, like I said, in the top right-hand corner, host a Dialogue. Any of you could host your own shows on here. It's not very difficult. What a strange career Michael Johnson has had. Beat top guys, but loses to lesser guys. I know. Isn't that funny? Like, it's so weird watching Michael Johnson. I mean, his record right now, 17-13. He's a guy training out of Hard Knocks 365 with Henry Hooft. He's a guy training with Michael Johnson. So I'll talk about it right now. I'm going to have a podcast next week. It's going to be a Bellator 204 preview, because you don't have any UFC next week. And I'm really excited about it, because I've already got some great guests lined up. I've got some interviews that have already been finished. And one of the interviews I have, he actually trains with Michael Johnson. And I'm sure he trained with Michael Johnson for his fight coming up. So if you guys can decipher that one, go for it. But yeah, so training at Hard Knocks 365, always working on your striking there. There's always great training partners. But yeah, losses to Darren Elkins, Justin Gaethje, Khabib. Man, those are 3 tough fights. Win over Dustin Poirier, lost to Diaz, lost to Beneil Dariush, split decision. Beats Edson, beats Melvin Gillard back in 2014. Gleison Tebow, 2013, straight knockout. And that was when Gleison Tebow still had that it factor. Win over Joe Lozon when it still really, really mattered. Lost to Reza Madadi. And if you guys follow international MMA like I try and do, Reza Madadi just signing with ACB. And that card got scrapped, and there's a lot of strange things going on over there. But my point is, Reza Madadi is a good fighter. Lost to Miles Jury. Win over Danny Castillo. Win over Tony Ferguson. So yeah, he's had a really weird career. Win over Nam Fan on The Ultimate Fighter, Caceres. Yeah, he's had a really strange career. And that 17-13 record doesn't really do him justice because he's got so many different tools. 8 knockouts on his record, and he's got that punching power. I mean, we all saw it in that Justin Gaethje fight. When it was Justin Gaethje's coming out party. I'd like to get your thoughts on Justin Gaethje and James Vick. We got that fight coming up in a couple of weeks, and I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a good fight. I would like to get your thoughts, like I said, on it. I kind of have a different prediction and a different outcome for that fight than most do, but I think it's going to be a really good contest, and it'll be interesting to see what happens because with a loss for Gaethje, I mean, what would that bring his record to in the UFC? Would it be 1-3 if he loses that fight? Yeah, he'd be 1-3 in the UFC, and he would still be ranked, which is kind of hard to believe. I mean, a guy coming over from World Series of Fighting with, the hype train that he had, and a great amateur career. He's undefeated as a pro and an amateur, gets the win over Michael Johnson, and then gets knocked out by Alvarez and knocked out by Dustin Poirier, 2 of the best in the lightweight division in the UFC. So it'll be interesting to see what happens for Gaethje. And it's kind of neat that, well, not neat. It's interesting that he's taking this fight because he said, I've only got like 4 left in me. I don't want to take a lot more damage. But you're going up against James Vick, who's 13-1. And James Vick's no slouch. I mean, 3 knockouts, 5 submissions, 5 decisions with wins over Trinaldo, Joe Duffy, which was a TKO, Marco Polo Reyes, Abel Trujillo. Like, he's got that, sidekick that he kind of throws to extend distance against his opponents. And he's really good at that. Now, the one thing for Gaethje to get the win, all he has to do is keep throwing a leg kick and beat. Yeah, Gaethje needs to utilize his leg kicks. They're lethal, but I don't know if he's UFC material, TBH. He's taken some beatings in the octagon. So, yeah, to my point, all he has to do is use the leg kicks. And I'll throw a plug out here for Mike Heck and the Extra Rounds podcast. He had James Vick on, and James Vick talked about this fight, and he said, well, I understand he's going to throw leg kicks. He does that. But the one thing that scares me about Justin Gaethje for his own safety is that he'll stand and trade, and then he stands there and puts his 2 hands up almost like a boxing block to block the punches. But in the UFC, all you have to do, in boxing you could too, but all you have to do is throw a hook or throw an uppercut or throw a kick. Like, there's so many different things you could do to get through that guard of Justin Gaethje. So, yeah, that's going to be an interesting fight, and it's a decent card. And then if we can talk some more about some of the fights that are coming up that have been announced, one of the fights I'm really looking forward to is that at that UFC Denver card, the 25th anniversary card. They've got Ray Borg fighting Joseph Benavidez. I think that's going to be a really good one. I mean, Benavidez had a rough time against Sergio Pettis with his he's got such quick striking. But it'll be interesting to see how Benavidez comes back against Ray Borg. I mean, both guys have good wrestling. And I think, right from the outset, from right now, I think Borg's going to be able to get the win. But that's a good fight. And then again, I think the best fight on that card is, the most interesting fight on that card is Jermaine Durandamy and Raquel Pennington. I talked about this on the Talktagon with Ty O'Keefe. I'm going to bring it up right here. If you look at Jermaine Durandamy's record, and yeah, I understand, she fought Holly Holm. I had Holly Holm winning that fight. I couldn't believe that the judges saw it for Durandamy, and that has nothing to do with the point deductions that should have been taken against Durandamy for the hits after the bell. I mean, I believe it was either Dan Murgliotta or there was another local ref from New York that was reffing that fight. And the referee, whoever it was, went up to Durandamy after the first one and said, hey, okay, next time that happens, I'm going to take a point. You can't do that. And then it happened again, and they didn't take a point. But I had Holly Holm winning that fight regardless. So if we look at Jermaine Durandamy, a win in 2017, then a fight in 2016, one in 2015, one in 2013, 13, 12, 11, 11, 10, 8. And you could say, well, she was a kickboxer. Yeah, she was a pro kickboxer up until I think it was 2011. So after that, she hasn't been totally active. She's 7-3, 3 knockouts, 4 decisions. I mean, wins over Julie Kedzie, Anna Elmos, Holm, Pacheco, losses to Nunes, losses to Julia Budd. She actually beat Julia Budd in a kickboxing fight in 2008. But Julia Budd's, like, if you're not paying attention to an injury flares up when Cyborg raised her hand. Yeah, I know. I was upset about that. But To my point about Bellator, I understand a lot of the fans out there are very passionate about the UFC, but at the same time, man, I love watching Bellator. Some of the things they do, it's a lot of fun. I really think that the welterweight Grand Prix coming up September 29th, that's going to be a lot of fun. It's kind of tough and tricky where you have you've got Rory McDonald fighting Gegard Mousasi for the middleweight belt, and then he's also involved in the welterweight Grand Prix. But there's a lot of matchups that I'm really interested in. Like I think the MVP daily fight, finally we're going to be able to see it. So we have that. I'm interested to see Lorenz Larkin. I know there was a bit of a back and forth between myself and someone else there on Twitter earlier on today. I think, or actually it was on Reddit. I think it's going to be interesting to see how Lorenz Larkin fares against Yaroslav Amosov in the alternate bout in that welterweight Grand Prix. Lorenz Larkin, he's got some of the best footwork and some of the best punching speed out there. I wouldn't compare him to Cody Garbrandt. Don't go that far. But at the same time, Lorenz Larkin's a special kind of athlete and fighter. And if you didn't get a chance to watch it, go back and watch his fight against Fernando Gonzalez. I believe it was Bellator 187, it might have been. But yeah, that was, I'm going to look it up just to make sure. But yeah, Lorenz Larkin's a guy that I'm going to be watching in that, whether or not he gets into the tournament. I'm surprised he wasn't in it. Fernando Gonzalez, Bellator 193, sorry. So that was a good fight on his end. But yeah, that welterweight Grand Prix special. You've got Vanderlei Silva and Quentin Rampage Jackson 4, which is, I don't think anybody wants to see that. I'm not looking forward to that anyway. But yeah, it's a stacked card. I know with this new DAZN deal, everybody's kind of wondering what they're going to do because they're going to have 7 stacked cards per year plus 15 DAZN and Paramount cards. But it should be really interesting to see what they do with those 7 stacked cards. I mean, before you had Bellator 200 where they stacked it for the UK crowd, and it's great to see that they signed 24 European fighters to join the promotion. I mean, some of them are returning fighters. Like if you look at Ion Pascu, he recently competed in Bellator earlier on this spring, so not surprised that they signed him, but a lot of different SBG fighters as well coming out of that. So really interesting stuff there with Bellator, and a lot of really good UFC fights coming up. So next week, I'll be hosting another episode of Fight Night Picks for the Fans. Hopefully, we can work out some of the kinks, and you guys can call in live on air. I really appreciate all the comments, and I love, chatting with you guys, whether it's on Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, wherever. Make sure you check out episode number 34 of the podcast that I released yesterday on YouTube with you've got Josh Emmett and you've got John McDessie. And if you're looking for something to watch this weekend, there's EFC. It's probably just about done right now. And you had LFA 47 last night. And then later on tonight, you have Road to M1 Global from Nashville. It's the promotion's return to the States. Their last event there was 2011. And then tomorrow morning at 2 a.m. Eastern, you've got Ryzen 12. And I might be rising. Oh, that's bad. I may be rising a little early to watch Ryzen 12. You can catch that on Fight TV. So just a reminder before we go that this call is brought to you by Dialogue. Like I said, if you like discussion, debate, Dialogue lets you have your own call-in show over the internet. And the button's right up at the top right-hand corner. You just hit host Dialogue, sign in with your Twitter account, and you're good to go. And you can start hosting shows like this. So I really appreciate everybody listening in. Make sure you check out the last episode of the podcast. And I will be back next Saturday to give you another episode of Fight Night Picks for the Fans. And hopefully we can have Evil Eddie joining us. If not, we'll have another special guest co-host. So I will see you all again next weekend.